First topic that we will be discussing today is tokens. So as I'm sure you are familiar with at this point, DERO has the ability for us to install smart contracts. And the topic that we're hopefully going to wrap this all into is ecosystem tools and the wisdom behind locally executing dApps. So if we're talking about DERO tokens, it's very interesting because DERO tokens do not operate like most tokens on virtual machine chains. They follow all of the same rules as DERO's L1. So all of this great stuff that you've learned about DERO and all of the wonderful technological greatness that is DERO is inseparable from tokens. So if you think about what you can do with DERO, you can do the same thing with tokens in terms of functionality and transfers and different stuff like that. There's no separation of those two things essentially. Where that comes into play, probably one of the largest or first things that people realize is that with something like this, they are able to be transferred without the involvement of the issuing smart contract. So can anyone tell me why that's important? Yeah, hear you. Yes. Absolutely. So in my mind, if you're going to build something that you're relying on, that's a very large fail point. And if you're going to be trusting any of this stuff to protect you in any form or fashion, I don't understand how you could build anywhere that does not have this. It's something that's always stuck in my mind. It wasn't until DERO and specifically Stargate that I realized there's finally a place that I can realize my dreams, you know? So that's kind of like the base thing that people will realize with the tokens, that they're truly free, just as free as DERO. There's no controlling overlords. There's nothing that can change the way that those tokens operate because somebody doesn't like your wallet address or something of that nature. And that is really just the beginning of what you can do with tokens. So when I talk about tokens, in my mind, tokens on DERO equals smart contract. There's no separation between those two in my mind. You need to create a smart contract to create a token. And again, the token doesn't exist without having a smart contract. So essentially they are one in the same. And it's really cool with DERO that we have a very easy to use virtual machine with the DVM. So that allows us to program all types of extra functionalities above what DERO's L1 offers, which is our general privacy and just the behavior of the tokens themselves. What I'm getting at here is we can add different things to make them better, I guess you could say, or not even necessarily better. Maybe it's just you can add more things to realize more potential with it. Some of these things are pretty much essential to be able to actually successfully build anything with this stuff. So we're all using this encrypted blockchain. And if we're making these tokens that are, again, encrypted, no different than DERO, You might want to have certain things like being able to prove ownership so that the tokens and what you're doing with them actually has some validity in the real world. I think it's one of the things that it seems to me that normal, I'm just going to use the word normal people. I don't, just the average folk that are maybe not educated into crypto and this type of stuff. It's tough for them to view, like, how does this fit into my real world area, and what can I do with that? And over the years, there's been such a negative connotation created over privacy and encryption. Definitely in the millennial generation, that was ingrained in quite a few people, that encryption and privacy is a bad thing. And the point I'm trying to get at here is that's one of the most beautiful things to me about DERO, is that it allows us to operate in this realm of complete protection, but while still being able to offer real world services and real world value that corporations and large scale entities can actually use to perform their business. Like, I personally can't think of too many any other chains that you could build all of the complete parts to whatever your business may be, all of it being on chain, all of it being encrypted and private. That to me was definitely quite a mind-blowing experience when I realized, wow, this exists. So anyways, coming back from that tangent, there are a few more common functionalities that you might find in tokens, such as proving amounts or timestamps, because again, we're dealing with privacy technology, so it's not like other public blockchains where you can just go and look this type of stuff up to verify what you need. Another one that is quite common is emittance. So this can be thought of as simple as when you mint a NFT, for example, it emits a single atomic unit to your wallet. Going above and beyond that, you can use emittance for things like recurring emittance, essentially. If you need something to keep occurring and keep sending, the smart contract or token can facilitate all of that for you. One of the cool parts about all those things that I just mentioned is that they are all here now. And they exist between a few token standards that are already created on DERO that you can all use today. One of which is Civilware's Artificer NFA Market Standard 1. Another one that you might have heard of is the G45 token standards, and there are quite a few varieties of those. And for today's discussion, I would like to focus on Artificer a little bit more specifically. So the artificers at Civilware, I think, have created something here that is extremely unique. And personally, I had never seen it before, and it still to this day blows my mind when I think about what this could potentially turn into. So if you are familiar with tokenized assets or NFTs, which I'm sure most of you are, those are essentially a token on a blockchain that represents some kind of asset, whether that be digital, which is pretty much what we've seen up to this point in terms of tokenized assets. So yeah, that's what we essentially, the use case that we've seen up to this point is that tokenized tokens minted on a blockchain are often used to represent some type of asset. When it comes to NFAs, they definitely are that. They are a tokenized asset that represents something. But the reality of it is they are much more than a way to speculate on digital art, which up to this point has been a large percentage of the use case of tokenized assets. I think we can all agree on that that's very prominent when we're talking about this type of stuff. So let's dig into NFAs a little more deeply and figure out why I believe that this is the very truth of the matter. So to get started onto this, I would like to just give a few of my initial thoughts when I first started looking into this standard. So I had encountered a few problems or just nuisances, things I did not enjoy when I was minting tokens on other blockchains. And immediately those were resolved in the NFA standard. And they're very simple things, but not very many tokens seem to give this amount of freedom. That's, I guess, the conclusion of where this is heading. So one of the first things I noticed was that NFAs support basically anything. And what I mean by that is it doesn't have to be a picture. It doesn't have to be a JPEG. It doesn't have to be anything like that. You could make it whatever type of file that you wanted. You can go above and beyond that and do essentially packaged assets that contain more than one thing. You could think about that. No, it's not a good way to say that. So the second thing that I had noticed when I was looking into NFAs was that you could choose your own storage location. And that was one thing that I did not enjoy in some other areas of tokenized assets. A large part of that comes down to the centralization of the storage. I mean, you can use IPFS in some places, but it's quite often when you're dealing with tokenized assets, you get what you're given. I think there's another way to word that, but you can only work within their defined parameters of here's the data that we're looking for, and if it doesn't check these boxes, then you're not minting a token. So already between these two things, I felt an immense sense of freedom in terms of tokenized assets. And the third and final initial thought that really got me to dig into this and find my passion for this asset standard was that it supports mutable and immutable parameters. So that allows creators quite a bit of freedom that this does exist in other areas, but not with any privacy. So to me, when I think about things like this, that I could think, okay, may have seen that somewhere else. If it doesn't meet up to the DERO minimum, it's nothing as far as I'm concerned. That's the way my mind has correlated that. Pretty much where I'm going with this topic is, to me, the realization that I got to with this is NFAs are the evolution of NFTs. And there is one more very large part that I think will help you clarify why people like myself think that. So the very yeah, sure. So the, I guess, showpiece, we can call it, for NFAs is um, Another feature of NFAs that is very unique, if not one of the only asset standards I have seen do this, is that NFAs use a DERO file, a DERO signed file. So how many of you know what a DERO signed file is? Raise your hand. Wonderful. So Captain has blessed us with some pretty cool stuff in the DERO wallet. And by the show of two hands, this definitely needs to be talked about a little more, I think. So when you create a NFA, one of the steps that you do is you take your DERO wallet and you sign the asset file that you plan to mint. So essentially what that does is it creates it's similar to PGP. The word encryption is always strong on my mind there, but I don't feel that that's a true representation, because what a DERO file sign allows to do is it allows any other DERO wallet to verify the validity of that asset file through the file sign. So this is actually part of the NFA when you mint it. This is just an example of what a DERO file sign looks like. So you can see that it shows the address, and there are two different signatures here that essentially verify that this asset was created and signed by this wallet. So if we're talking about things maybe that are more in the tangible realm, because that is definitely where I see a lot of this stuff going. If you need to verify whether it's a title, or it doesn't even have to be any tangible type of stuff, whatever you need to verify, let's say 10 years have passed and you now come into possession of an NFA. You can take this DERO file sign, which is exactly what I've shown here. So this is the encrypted contents of the file sign. I'm great at presentations, if you guys hadn't noticed. So anyways, this would be the contents of the file that you signed. So another DERO wallet could essentially take these contents and recreate the actual file. So you don't need to prove that you have the real one. Like when I say that, the thing that I think about is like, there's supposed to be longevity in all this. Like we're talking about building new worlds essentially, or improving our current world, depending on which philosophy you want to look at. So with that being said, I'm assuming we're going to want to do this for decades and decades and probably centuries, because I do think that most of us believe that this is going to benefit humanity, and greatly so. So anyways, where I'm going with that is 10 years later, you encounter one of these. You could 100% certainty make sure that you receive the original file that creator signed 10 years ago. So to me, that was a pretty big thing that was important to, again, the longevity that I hope we see in technology such as DERO. So now to actually get to the showstopper of NFAs, as I would call it, the thing that really sets NFAs apart is that NFAs have a self-contained marketplace built into them. So essentially, the marketplace supports sales and auctions. It supports charities. It supports creator royalties. And it also supports a adjustable artificer fee. So the developers of this essentially made it optional for you to help them make this better. And again, to me, that just was another little freedom tick in the box of NFAs for me. So if we want to take a look at what that looks like a little bit, I would first like to describe what I would call traditional markets. And this is definitely framed around tokenized type of assets, but really this goes for, like, this is a store model, essentially, what I'm calling traditional here. So you have, you over here, and you have a market or some kind of store that contains products that are physically in this store. So for you to be performing transactions or dealing business with this store, essentially you are reliant on them, on what rules they have when you're in the store, what products they have. It's centralization at its basic sense, essentially. Without this market or this store, none of those transactions exist. Where NFAs differ, like we said, they all have an internal marketplace. So the way you could think of that is each NFA has its own market, just like this market is. So you can sell, buy, do all your transactions, except there's nothing centrally containing any of these assets. They're all free floating in the DERO sea, if you want to use that term. The interesting part about this too is that because DERO tokens operate on the L1 standard of DERO, they all play by the same rules. So even though we have these NFAs with this built-in marketplace that is, like I said, just floating stores all around you that you can just grab whenever you so like, you could potentially put a NFA into a traditional style of market setup. And really, it doesn't stop there, because if we can put one of these here, what's to stop us from putting another one into there? So if you guys remember when I was talking about package assets and stuff like that, this is along the lines of that concept. There is a more simpler way that you can deal with it, but I did want to talk about and show this aspect of it, that you could load and do different things depending on whatever your needs were for your application. It is very interesting to me to realize that type of stuff is possible while still being able to preserve my privacy.